Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome back to Duncan House Diaries. I hope I find you all in the finest of fettle, following a fortuitous and restive festive period. Allow me to take this opportunity to wish each and every one of you happiness and health in this, the year of our Lord 2025. I have a funny feeling that together we are going to have a particularly bizarre year. All I ask for from you is that you keep up your indomitable support and overwhelming kindness, and in return we will endeavour to share with you our highest highs, our lowest lows, and everything in between. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this year's first episode of Duncan House Diaries. In the words of Prime Minister Gladstone, if you are cold, tea will warm you. If you are too heated, it will cool you, and if you are excited, it will calm you. Well, when renovating a 200-year-old semi-derelict estate home in the darkest depths of the English countryside, one is quite often cold. One can find oneself often quite heated, and on more than one occasion, a touch overexcited. So the fact that we can now have tea on our gargantuan new wood-burning stove is somewhat of a revelation. As you will remember, we were waiting on some indispensable flue adapter pipe in order to complete the installation of our 12 kilowatt La Nordica monster. Luckily, it arrived just before Christmas, and after no insignificant amount of fiddling, and with a small sprinkling of jiggery-pokery, we were finally able to light the furnace and unleash a tidal wave of heat back into our home. Not only does this log burner represent a quite practical development, it's also deeply symbolic, as this is the first step forward in our scheme of internal renovations. And, of course, the single most important thing is that Her Royal Highness Princess Quincy has somewhere to warm the cockles of her soul. Naturally, the only logical first step was to use the stove to make some tea. Jazzy and I said we weren't going to do Christmas presents this year, what with having a few bits and bobs to pay for at the house. However, I simply couldn't resist purchasing this gorgeous Georgian copper kettle that I saw in the window of one of our local antique shops in Ashbourne. On top of that, I was also a very lucky boy to have been gifted some Faulkner and Mason Royal Blend loose leaf tea from my uncle for Christmas, which we were naturally awfully keen to try. So, as you know by now, Duncan House is able to provide almost everything that one might need for appropriate country living, and afternoon tea is absolutely no exception. Once the kettle was on the boil, it was time to visit the billiard room and have a little rummage in search of the adequate paraphernalia. Unsurprisingly, it took very little time at all to find what we needed. First up, an appropriate side table is required to reduce clutter and ensure suitable libation synchronicity. I thought I'd done quite a good job of cleaning this little table, but I was politely informed by Jazzy that I had not. Next up, of course, it's awfully difficult to drink tea without a teacup, and we had a funny feeling that we'd seen some suitable receptacles in a box on the floor somewhere. Huzzah! Now, if anyone with more knowledge than I can enlighten me on the provenance of these teacups, please do so in the comments. However, at the moment, I will simply refer to them as splendid. We found a modest and unassuming jug to hold our gold label whole milk. This one boasting a delicate but very attractive floral design. Now, I'm not ashamed to admit it, I nearly had a level 10 meltdown when I realised that I had forgotten the tea strainer. However, after taking a few moments to compose myself, I returned once more to the billiard room, and to my absolute delight, crisis was averted and the show was able to go on. An appropriate teapot was selected and, of course, pre-warmed. We're not barbarians after all. The tea was popped, a good whiff was taken, and the quality of the preparation inspected. 10 out of 10. But then what does one expect from Faulkner and Mason. So all that was left to do was to wait for the kettle to boil and begin the ritual. Now, I'm fully aware that expected etiquette is not to stir the tea once it's in the teapot. However, it has always been the tradition for Jazzy's mother to stir 7 times one way and 7 times the other, so this is how it will be done. Granted, we may not have been able to put together an entirely matching tea set. However, as I always say, one must do one's best with what one has, and I'm sure you will agree that this eclectic collection loses nothing for its slight incongruity. And just like that, we enjoyed the first of many proper cups of tea in the boot room at Duncombe House. Warming, cooling, and calming. Now, I will be entirely honest with you. Although Jazzy and I are naturally extremely keen to progress our projects at Duncombe House, we are by no means renovation robots. And so after an extraordinarily busy year, the last 2 weeks over the Twixmas period have been rather light on the DIY front. However, we have continued, when feasible, the reconditioning of our front door. Although many areas of the house are very dilapidated and past saving, our gorgeous 4-panel, 6-pane solid oak front door is in exceptional condition. The only real issues are that what with the flood and all, it has warped somewhat at the very bottom, making it a touch sticky to open, and that some of the paint started to fade and bubble. In the interests of doing everything as properly as possible, we decided that opposed to simply adding yet another coat of paint, the most grown-up course of action would be to take off the door entirely, fully strip it, and clean and recondition the door furniture. At the end of the day, the front door is arguably one of the most important elements of a house, and seeing as this door in particular has likely seen more comings and goings than we can even begin to imagine, it feels wholly appropriate to give it all the time and attention it requires. So, after dislodging all of the paint-clodded screws, we were able to lift this bastion of security into the front room, ready for its makeover. Now, anyone who has done DIY in an old property will have invariably, at some point, had to strip or sand. A task which always promises instant satisfaction, but one which in fact, after a very short period of time, usually becomes ludicrously mundane and tedious. Of all the products that one can buy, Paint Stripper is by far the most dishonest. Despite promising in some cases the power to strip 7 coats of paint in one go, we are yet to find one powerful enough to even adequately strip 1 coat at a time. Now, I know many of you will be screaming at your screens, urging us to get the door dipped. And to protect your sanities, we will certainly be pursuing this for the remaining doors in the house. But for the front door, we felt it deserved some good, old-fashioned elbow grease. Of course, without door furniture, the front door is like a yacht without a mast, and we have every intention of using the original door furniture, which has kept the inhabitants of Duncombe House safe for a century. First and foremost, we have this exceptional lock, with its equally exceptional key, both made by the Elgood brothers of Leicester. Now, I have struggled somewhat to find any meaningful information on this company, so if anyone is able to shed more light on the origins of this lock, please do share in the comments. In addition to the lock, we have these spectacular beehive-style doorknobs, which perfectly complement the brass escutcheon, or keyhole cover to you and I. So, with the support of the Roberts and many an open fire, Jazzy has finally got the door ready for a coat of our delectable Fenwick and Tilbrook primer. Hopefully, in the not too distant future, we will have the door painted in its final colour, which we are still yet to reveal. For all of you that very kindly commented your paint suggestions on our short, your patience will very soon be rewarded as we reveal the final shade of green and cream which are going to become synonymous with Duncombe House. Quincy has had an uncharacteristically busy and energetic couple of weeks. Naturally, as a member of the landed gentry, her intention for the festive period was to relax ever so slightly more than usual. Possibly ponder the poetry of Keats, and perhaps, if pressed, eat all of the leftovers. However, on several occasions recently, she seems to have become quite overwhelmed by the rigours of socialising and has experienced quite unexpected episodes of hysteria. Brought on, one presumes possibly, by the fact that Bree has finally realised she too has the right to own her own sticks. We had a delightful visit from cousin Zephyr, who politely but firmly reminded Quincy that she is in fact a dog, and as such, running, spinning and swimming are all parts of the job. Of course, the downside to behaving like a dog is that one does get terribly filthy. Borgia and Dean are slowly but surely asserting their dominance as the alpha pets at Duncombe House. Not that anyone is particularly surprised about that. Dean has found a new favourite spot sat in the firelighters, and Borgia has become somewhat of a tummy tickle floozy. Both of our dear feline friends are over the moon at the installation of the new log burner, and I'm sure you will agree, turns something quite utilitarian into something extraordinarily chic. We thought it would be wise to take full advantage of the fact that the world seems to turn slightly slower between Christmas and New Year, and take the opportunity to visit the next door neighbours. Seeing as they're having a few bits and bobs done at their house too, we thought they'd likely appreciate some of our guidance, and more importantly, facetious comments. A quick turmeric shot to keep us fortified, and it's time to explore. There are myriad similarities between Cork Abbey and Kellwich Abbey, where Duncombe House is built. Firstly, both have histories which date back to the early 1100s, as both properties were originally the sites of Augustinian priories. Unlike Kellwich Abbey, however, which was built in the Jacobean style in 1849, Cork Abbey is a Baroque mansion, built in 1701. Imagine the metal detecting one could do here, ladies and gentlemen. It was owned uninterrupted for 300 years by the Harper family before being passed to the National Trust in 1985 in lieu of death duties. Cork Abbey is often referred to as the unstately stately home, due to the fact that for various reasons it was never seriously modernised. On this visit, sadly, we weren't able to venture inside. However, there is still plenty to discover in the spectacular and enviable gardens here at Cork. I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was spectre grey, and the winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. The tangled bine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. It will come as no surprise to you that Jazzy and I are absolutely in love with greenhouses. And although Cork Abbey doesn't actually have a single glass house with a mint-and-tiled floor as magnificent as ours, what their collection lacks in floor coverings, some may argue, it makes up for in majesty and magnitude. These visually sensational buildings would have had an awfully practical use for those living at Cork Abbey. Before the advent of the supermarket, all manner of delicacies would have been produced in these heated and climate-controlled greenhouses, which at the time would have presented the most cutting edge of technology. Now this, ladies and gentlemen, is what I call a walled garden. Now, one could make an entire series of videos on the mystical and magical offerings at Cork Abbey, but we will simply share with you today a few of our absolute favourites. Cork Abbey really does have everything one might need for civilised living. For starters, they have an ice house which one could drive an entire double-decker bus into, a must-have in 19th century England. They have bees, which, on a side note, I'm extraordinarily jealous of. watch this space for Duncombe House honey. They have a gardener's bothy, which is ever so slightly larger than ours, yet no less full of historical horticultural heirlooms. They have fine examples of Trachycarpus fortunei, Cedrus atlantica, Ulmus procera, and even their own Clive, although he doesn't seem as jolly as ours. Like any self-respecting abode, they have their own church at Cork Abbey, which invariably makes organising weddings, christenings, and funerals far easier. And lastly, but by no means least, they have what in my opinion is an essential feature of any well-balanced home: an entirely superfluous 64-metre gardener's tunnel. Because, as we all know, having to look at one's gardeners is terribly gauche. We've had lots of requests for more in-depth tours of Duncombe House. However, what we would like to offer you today is probably better described as a familiarisation, or at a push, an orientation of the main house itself. In the coming months, we will slowly but surely get you fully up to speed, so that eventually you will know the place as well, if not better, than we do. However, we shan't be compelled to rush this lovely process. We are quite free of any Erostratus syndrome presently and intend wholeheartedly to remain that way. Duncombe House is located right on the border of the two fine English counties of Derbyshire and Staffordshire, just to the south of the Peak District National Park. We are extraordinarily fortunate to enjoy the benefit of what we call the paddock and the orchard, an area in front of the house which is home to an abundance of fruit trees, and where one day we very much hope to dig our own pond, which in time will become the home to our very own paddling of Jemima puddle ducks, perhaps a gaggle of geese, or if I get my way, a modest ostentation of peacocks. Duncombe House, very fortunately, and no doubt probably intentionally, faces directly south, which means throughout the year it enjoys the sunshine. Not that we get a great deal of that here. The architecture of the house is classic Neo-Georgian estate style, with elements of vernacular revival. She has two gorgeous ground floor angled bay windows with plate glass sashes, and a central gable porch with coped verges on shaped kneelers, and an open basket arch leading to the front door. Not to mention two fantastic lavandula angustifolias flanking the garden path, and a wonderful Taxus piccata hugging the southeast corner. As we move gently to the east, we're greeted by the more subtle and understated leeward aspect of the house, which boasts a fabulous stone carving, the two tallest chimney stacks, and this square bay window, which is part of the office. Continuing to the north, following Borgia closely, we have what one might call the business end of the house, and an aspect which I'm not afraid to say I may almost prefer to the front. The first floor stone mullioned window we believe is part of the oldest iteration of the house, but naturally it's so difficult to tell exactly what is and what isn't original, and what has been added as the building has matured over the past 200 years. Two elements, which one can almost guarantee are not original, are these two flat-roofed additions, which we are still pondering the best course of action for. As I always say, fortune favours the foolhardy. Huzzah! Gosh, didn't she do well with those tiny little legs? And just like that, we're in the garden, gently meandering across the upper lawn, past the Cortaderia Celiana towards the greenhouse, an element of the garden which we will no doubt dedicate multiple future episodes to as we slowly but surely restore it to its former glory and contentedly fail to grow absolutely anything of note inside. Onwards and upwards, it's the gardener's bothy, which again is fully deserving of its own dedicated chapters, as, like the other buildings here at Duncombe House, it too secretes its own personal hoard of forgotten treasures. We can now gently loop back around to show you the western and windward side of the house. Taking the brunt of almost all of the prevailing weather, this side of the house is not only in the worst condition, but it's also costing by far the most amount to restore. However, we don't begrudge her a single penny, and once all this nasty scaffolding is down, you will see exactly why. For with her profusion of windows, framed above by the gables and below by the hydrangeas, she spoils us to a most magnificent vista. And just like that, we're back in the front garden. I do hope that this segment has given you a little more perspective on the place that we call home. Of course, if you have any questions or general observations, please do share them with us in the comments. You will know by now how much we adore hearing from you. I feel like I've perhaps already overshared a little in this episode, so I'll keep this chapter nice and brief. Each year, the chaps and I get together just before Christmas for a few japes, a few libations, and a few grueling trials and tribulations in order to establish an annual champion. This year, we competed in an array of complex and high-brow challenges which tested not just our brawn, but also our brains. We had a very well-organised tree climbing competition, a slightly less well-organised aeronautical engineering battle, and a positively multi-dimensional left-handed throwing competition. And before you ask, he did just throw that backwards. I made what I personally believe to be the finest dish to come out of the Alps, the tartiflette. This masterpiece, which for those of you who don't know is essentially a cheese pie, is one of the finest tasting things on this planet. It has taken me years to perfect the recipe and destroy all of those delicate eccentricities that one might expect in France in order for it to perfectly appease us dull-tongued Englishmen. Now, I do not wish to brag, but it received rave reviews on New Year's Eve, so if anyone would care for my recipe, please do let me know. Finally, for those of you concerned about Rob, aka Captain Chaos, he is stalwart as ever, and is in no way allowing his newfound fame to change him. One can only assume that he intended to run over this traffic cone and drag it underneath his car all the way to the house. However, his reasoning for doing so is still somewhat of a mystery to me. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, please let us thank you from the deepest, darkest depths of our hearts for your time and your support. It is truly, truly kind of you. If you feel inclined, please do subscribe, as we simply adore sharing all of our nonsense with you. Until next time, TTFN.